Human males are so milky. The alien girl stares at the human in total shock. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main story. Ethan Carter had been through a lot in his life. As a skilled pilot and engineer, he had traveled to countless planets, exploring the unknown and encountering strange species along the way. But nothing could have prepared him for the day he met Zara Zinth, an alien whose beauty was as undeniable as her exotic nature. Zara was tall, with smooth green skin that shimmered under the harsh light of the alien sun, her large, golden eyes glowing with an intensity that Ethan couldn't quite understand. Her hair, a cascade of silver waves, seemed to float around her face, catching the light in ways that made it almost ethereal. Ethan had been sent to this remote planet on a routine diplomatic mission. Little did he know, this world would be where his life would change forever. He had been expecting to meet the usual crew of diplomats and traders, but instead, he was face to face with Zara, whose mere presence left him speechless. As their eyes met, something in the air shifted. Zara's gaze lingered on him, studying him in a way that made him feel both nervous and exhilarated at the same time. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she tilted her head, as though trying to understand something about him that she couldn't quite place. Ethan wasn't sure what was happening, but he could feel the tension building between them. "You must be Ethan Carter, the human," Zara said, her voice smooth and melodic, though there was a hint of something else in it, something he couldn't quite decipher. Ethan nodded, still feeling a bit lost in the intensity of her gaze. "Yes, that's me," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He had faced intergalactic conflicts, dangerous alien species, and technical failures on his missions, but none of that had prepared him for this moment. Zara took a step closer, her body language fluid and graceful. There was something undeniably alluring about her. Ethan tried to focus, reminding himself that he was here for a job, but the magnetic pull of her presence was hard to ignore. As she moved closer, Ethan noticed a strange feeling creeping over him. His heart raced, and a warmth spread through his chest. Was this the kind of feeling one got when faced with a creature so unlike anything on Earth? It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. Zara stopped just a few feet away from him, her golden eyes never leaving his. She was studying him closely, as though trying to figure out what made him different from the countless other species she had encountered in her lifetime. "I've never seen a human quite like you," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan, still trying to keep his composure, chuckled nervously. "I'm just a guy who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." Zara raised an eyebrow. "No," she said, "it's more than that. I can sense something different about you." Ethan wasn't sure what to say to that. He had dealt with strange alien species before, but this was different. Zara's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate. But only for a moment. The air grew thick again, charged with something he couldn't fully grasp. "What's it like?" Zara asked, her voice suddenly low and curious. "Being a human male?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" Zara's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "I've heard rumors," she said, "about your fertility, about how human males are always ready." Ethan's cheeks flushed. He had no idea where this conversation was going, but he knew one thing for sure. He was about to find out just how different things were on this planet. And something told him his encounter with Zara was only just beginning. "I've never seen a human quite like you," Zara said, her voice carrying a curious tone that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He wasn't sure whether it was the intensity in her eyes or the way her words hung in the air, but something about this moment felt unlike anything he'd experienced before. Zara was not just another alien. There was something almost mesmerizing about her presence. Her golden eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light of the cave, seemed to pierce straight into him. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. He had dealt with plenty of unknowns in his career, but this was new. "I don't know what you mean," Ethan replied, his voice betraying a slight tremor. Zara stepped closer, her movements graceful, almost fluid, like she was gliding rather than walking. You humans are so unpredictable, she mused, her voice barely above a whisper. You're constantly driven, constantly in motion. I've heard stories, but I never imagined it would feel like this. Ethan furrowed his brow. Feel like what? Zara paused just in front of him, her tall frame towering over him by at least a foot. She looked down at him, her gaze filled with something between curiosity and awe. I can feel your presence, she said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. The way your energy shifts, the way you react to everything around you. It's unlike any other species I've encountered. Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. He was no stranger to being studied by alien species, but this was different. Zara was not merely observing him. It felt as though she was sensing him, trying to understand something deeper, something primal. I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan said, trying to sound calm, but the tension in the air was thick, and his words felt hollow. Zara's eyes softened, and she took another step closer. I think you do, she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. You're not like the others. There's a strange energy in you. Ethan could feel his pulse racing now. The atmosphere around them seemed charged, as though the very air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. He tried to focus, to maintain his professionalism, but Zara's presence was magnetic. I'm just a guy doing his job, Ethan muttered, feeling the heat rise to his face. Zara chuckled, the sound rich and melodic, but there was a sharpness to it that made Ethan's stomach twist. Just a guy? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I've never met a human like you, and I've met plenty. There's something about you, something that draws me in. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. He had heard rumors about the aliens he would encounter on this mission, but none of them had prepared him for Zara. She was unlike anything he had imagined. Strong, confident, and yet there was a vulnerability in her gaze that intrigued him. I don't think you're just some guy, Zara continued, her voice lowering. You're something more. Ethan took a step back, trying to create some distance between them. Look, I'm not here to. Whatever it is you think this is, he said, his voice firmer now. Zara's gaze never wavered. Then why does it feel like there's more between us? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan's mind raced, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt. There was something undeniable between them, something electric. And Zara seemed to feel it too. I don't know, Ethan admitted, his voice softer now. Zara reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. Her touch was cool, but there was a warmth to it that made his heart skip a beat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the cave, the wind howling outside. Zara's golden eyes locked onto his, and Ethan felt his body respond in a way he hadn't anticipated. Zara tilted her head, studying him with a strange, unreadable expression. You humans are so strange, she said, her voice almost contemplative. You're constantly driven by urges, desires, but you're also capable of such tenderness, such compassion. It's what makes you different from the others. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. We're not that different, he said quietly. Zara stepped even closer, her body almost touching his now. Oh, but you are, she said softly. You're not like the others. You're unpredictable, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to you. Ethan's mind was racing, but in that moment, he couldn't find the words. All he could do was stand there, feeling the weight of Zara's gaze, feeling something shift inside him. Zara's eyes softened once more, and she reached up to gently touch his cheek. You don't have to be afraid, she said, her voice warm and reassuring. I'm not going to hurt you, but I need you to understand. I've never felt anything like this before. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something neither of them fully understood. But one thing was certain, their connection was undeniable, and it was only going to grow stronger. He could feel it in the very air around them. I have never encountered a human like you before, Zara whispered, her voice laced with awe, as she took another step closer to Ethan. The tension in the air was thick, almost palpable, as the two of them stood in the dimly lit cave. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat resonating in his ears. He didn't know what to say. Zara was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her beauty, her intelligence, and the magnetic pull she had on him were undeniable. He had always been in control of situations, but now, with Zara standing so close, he felt a sense of vulnerability he hadn't experienced before. Zara's golden eyes locked with his, her gaze unflinching. "You're different," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan swallowed, trying to collect his thoughts. "What do you mean, different?" he asked, his voice shaky despite his best efforts to sound confident. Zara studied him for a moment, her expression shifting between curiosity and something deeper, something more intimate. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice tinged with fascination. "You're driven by something, but at the same time, you have a gentleness to you that none of the others possess." Ethan felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't used to being analyzed like this, but there was something in Zara's words that resonated with him. He had always prided himself on his self-control, his ability to stay focused no matter the situation. But now, with Zara's gaze piercing through him, he wasn't sure if he could keep that control intact. "I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, his voice softer now. Zara smiled. A small, knowing smile that made Ethan's heart race even faster. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I can feel it. You're different, Ethan. And it's not just your physical strength. There's something about you, something more." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He had always been taught that emotions could cloud judgment, that it was important to keep a clear head in any situation. But standing here with Zara, he was beginning to question everything he had ever believed. Zara's smile faded slightly, and her golden eyes softened as she took a step closer. "I've never met a human who makes me feel this way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Zara reached out, her fingers lightly brushing against his arm, sending a shock of warmth through his body. Her touch was soft, but there was a strength behind it, a strength that made Ethan feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and for the first time, he realized just how close they were. There was something undeniable between them, something that neither of them could ignore. "Zara," Ethan finally said, his voice low and steady. "I don't know what this is, but I feel it too. Something between us, something I can't explain." Zara's eyes met his, her gaze intense and searching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the cave was the distant howling of the wind, and yet the silence between them felt deafening. "It's more than just physical attraction," Zara said after a long pause, her voice filled with emotion. It's something deeper. Something I've never experienced before." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had always believed in the idea of destiny, of finding a connection with someone that transcended everything else. But with Zara, it felt like that connection was something he had never imagined, something that was pulling him in despite all his logical thinking telling him to keep his distance. "What are we supposed to do with this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara stepped even closer now, her body almost brushing against his. "I don't know," she replied, her breath warm against his skin. "But I think we'll figure it out. Together." The world seemed to stop for a moment, the air thick with the energy between them. Ethan's mind raced, but his body had already made the decision. He could feel the pull, the magnetic attraction that was drawing him closer to Zara with every passing second. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. Zara didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment as if savoring the connection. Ethan's heart raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he leaned closer, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft at first, hesitant, but quickly growing more intense. It was as if the entire universe had fallen away, leaving only the two of them in this moment, in this shared understanding. When they finally pulled away, neither of them spoke for a moment. The only sound was their combined breathing, heavy and uneven. Zara's golden eyes met Ethan's, her expression softer now, almost vulnerable. "What now?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't have an answer. All he knew was that whatever happened next, whatever this was between them, it was something neither of them could walk away from. It has been hours since their kiss, and yet neither Ethan nor Zara had moved from the quiet, secluded cave. The wind outside howled through the landscape, a distant reminder of the storm still raging on the planet. But inside, it was just the two of them, standing in a fragile silence that seemed to pulse with the energy between them. Ethan glanced at Zara, her golden eyes now calm but still intense. And for the first time, he noticed the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. She was different from the fierce, unyielding warrior he had imagined when he first met her. There was a softness to her, a complexity that he couldn't have understood before this moment. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, testing the connection they had. Zara looked at him, her eyes flickering with something unreadable, before she slowly wrapped her fingers around his, the touch warm and comforting. The weight of the moment settled between them as they stood there, unsure of where they were headed but knowing that they couldn't turn back. "I don't understand this," Ethan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, his thumb lightly tracing the back of Zara's hand. "I never thought this would happen. I never thought I'd feel like this." Zara's lips curled into a faint smile, and she tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes studying him with an expression that was a mix of curiosity and understanding. "Neither did I," she replied softly, her voice rich with a complexity Ethan hadn't expected. "But it's happening, Ethan. There's no denying it now." Ethan nodded slowly, the gravity of her words sinking in. He had come here on a mission, to explore and document new worlds, never imagining that he would meet someone who would challenge everything he thought he knew. Zara was not just any alien. She was unlike any being he had encountered before, and in some strange way, she had made him feel more alive than he had in years. He had always been a man of logic and reason, but Zara was something different, something that couldn't be explained by science or data. She was a force of nature, something raw and untamed, and it pulled him in like gravity. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Zara looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for an answer in him. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of something more. "But I know this. I'm not afraid." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the calmness in her words. "Not afraid? Of what? The danger, the unknown?" "No," Zara said with a soft laugh, her gaze flickering away for a moment. "Not of that. I'm not afraid of you, Ethan. I'm not afraid of what's happening between us. I'm afraid of losing it." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what to say, but he felt the same. The connection between them was undeniable, and yet the fear of losing it, of something tearing them apart, was just as real. For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Ethan squeezed her hand, grounding himself in the reality of the moment. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, his voice steady. "We don't even need to know what happens next. But we're in this together, whatever it is." Zara looked at him, her golden eyes softening as she nodded slowly. "Together," she whispered. And in that moment, something inside Ethan shifted. The tension that had been building between them, the uncertainty, seemed to fade, replaced by something else, something more powerful, more certain. He didn't know where this journey with Zara would lead them, but he knew one thing for sure. It was a journey he was willing to take. Together. It had been a few days since Ethan and Zara had admitted the depth of their connection. The initial awkwardness had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding between them. The winds outside still howled through the alien landscape, but inside the shelter they had found, the atmosphere was calm, almost peaceful. Ethan had been working on the small communication device he had brought with him, trying to establish contact with the mission's base. However, the storms on the planet were interfering with the signals, making it impossible to send any messages out. Zara had been observing him as he worked, her golden eyes following his every move. Despite the silence, there was a comfort in simply being in each other's presence. Ethan didn't have to explain everything to her. She understood, without words, that he needed this time to focus, just as she needed her own space to process everything. After hours of unsuccessful attempts to communicate, Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I can't get through to them," he muttered to himself, frustration creeping into his voice. Zara's voice broke the silence. "You're still thinking about Earth, aren't you?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He stared at the blinking lights on the device in front of him. "It's just, this mission, everything I've worked for," he finally said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I was supposed to be helping, exploring, documenting. But now, it's like I'm stranded. Alone, without a way out." Zara didn't respond immediately. She sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes intense. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "I'm here." Ethan turned to face her, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just the physical presence of Zara that had comforted him over the past few days. It was the bond they shared. Something unspoken but real. Something that had started out as curiosity, as mutual fascination, and had transformed into something more, something he hadn't expected. "I know," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "But I can't help but feel like I've failed. I don't know how to fix this, how to get back." Zara's expression softened, and she stood up, walking over to him. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You haven't failed," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're here now, and that's what matters. We'll figure it out. Together." Ethan looked up at her, meeting her gaze. There was something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, an unwavering confidence, a trust in him and in what they could accomplish together. It gave him hope, something he hadn't realized he was missing. "Together," he repeated, as if the word itself held power. He reached up and took her hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you, Zara." She smiled, and for the first time since arriving on this planet, Ethan felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace he had expected when he signed up for the mission, but it was something real, something worth fighting for. The storm outside seemed to have calmed slightly, the howling wind now a distant murmur against the shelter's walls. The quiet had settled into a comfortable rhythm, and for the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to relax. "I don't know how long we'll be here," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But whatever happens, I'm glad it's with you." Zara squeezed his hand in return, her smile deepening. "Me too, Ethan." The moment between them stretched on, a simple but profound understanding passing between them. The planet, the storm, the uncertainty of their future. It all seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, standing together in that quiet cave. They didn't know what the next step would be, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. It had been several weeks since Ethan and Zara had been stranded on the alien planet, and yet the time seemed to stretch endlessly. The initial panic and uncertainty had slowly turned into a strange routine. Despite their situation, despite the fact that they were still cut off from the rest of the world, they had managed to find a sense of peace in each other's company. Zara, with her quiet strength, had become a rock for Ethan, her calm presence grounding him in moments of doubt. Ethan, for his part, had thrown himself into fixing the communication device, trying tirelessly to reconnect with Earth. But with each failed attempt, his sense of hope waned, and the frustration started to show. One morning, after yet another unsuccessful communication attempt, Ethan sat back on the makeshift chair, rubbing his eyes in exhaustion. Zara entered the small shelter they had created for themselves, the warmth of the morning light casting her features in a soft glow. "Still no luck?" she asked softly, her voice a soothing balm to his wearied soul. Ethan shook his head, leaning back and letting out a deep sigh. "I don't know how much longer we can last like this, Zara," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "I can't even get a signal out. It's like we're completely isolated from everything." Zara sat down next to him, her golden eyes fixed on him with an understanding that Ethan didn't have to explain. She had seen his struggle, the toll it had taken on him mentally and emotionally. "I know it's hard," she said quietly, her hand brushing against his. "But you're not alone in this." Ethan turned to look at her, meeting her gaze with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he confessed, his voice soft. "You've kept me grounded. You've kept me from completely losing it." Zara smiled, a small but genuine smile that made something in Ethan's chest tighten. "We're in this together, Ethan. You don't have to carry the weight alone." For a moment, the silence between them was comfortable, peaceful. They didn't need to say anything more. Ethan felt the weight of the world lighten, just a little. Even though they were stranded on an alien planet, far from home, he had something here that he hadn't realized he needed: connection. Zara's presence gave him strength, even when it seemed like there was no hope. After a few moments of quiet, Ethan stood up and stretched. "I'm going to try again," he said, determination in his voice. Zara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I believe in you, Ethan." With that, Ethan returned to the small table where his communication device was still lying, its blinking lights a reminder of his ongoing struggle. As he worked, Zara sat nearby, quietly observing, offering her silent support. The day passed slowly, but as the sun began to set, casting the landscape in a warm golden light, Ethan felt something shift. He was so focused on the device that he almost didn't notice the faint sound of static coming through the speakers. His heart skipped a beat as he adjusted the dials, listening intently. Then there it was. A crackling voice, faint but unmistakable. "Ethan? Ethan Carter, do you read?" Ethan's heart raced as he grabbed the mic, his voice shaking with excitement. "This is Ethan Carter. I read you loud and clear." Finally, the voice on the other end crackled again, but this time it was clearer. "Ethan, we've been trying to reach you for weeks. We're sending a rescue team. Hold tight." Ethan could hardly believe it. After weeks of silence, after all the moments of doubt, he was finally hearing a response. "You're coming for us?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we're on our way," the voice confirmed. "Stay safe. We'll be there soon." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, so overwhelming that he could barely speak. He turned to Zara, a huge smile spreading across his face. "Zara, they're coming for us." Zara's eyes widened in surprise, and then a smile tugged at her lips. She stood and moved toward him, her golden eyes filled with warmth and something deeper. "We're not alone anymore," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to relax, to believe that everything would be okay. And as he looked at Zara, standing beside him, he realized something else too. The connection between them, the bond they had formed, was more than just survival. It was something he hadn't expected, but something he would never let go of. They weren't just stranded on this planet anymore. They were partners. And together, they could face whatever came next. It had been 3 days since Ethan and Zara had received the news that rescue was on the way. The initial excitement had worn off, replaced by the quiet anxiety of waiting. The wind outside had calmed, but inside the shelter, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan couldn't help but keep checking the communication device, his mind replaying the conversation over and over. Every time he glanced at Zara, he saw the same quiet resolve in her eyes, a reflection of the uncertainty they both felt. "Do you think they'll really come?" Ethan asked one evening, his voice tinged with doubt. Zara was sitting near the entrance, gazing out at the horizon where the first signs of dawn were breaking. Her expression was calm, but Ethan could sense the same worry she had been hiding for days. "They will," she replied softly, without turning to face him. "They have to. We just have to hold on a little longer." Ethan nodded, but he wasn't entirely convinced. The weeks of isolation had made the promise of rescue feel like a distant dream. But Zara's confidence, her unwavering belief that help would come, was something he found himself clinging to. As the days passed, their routine settled into a rhythm. Ethan worked on the communication device, attempting to improve the signal, while Zara helped him with tasks around the shelter. They spent their time talking about Earth, about her home planet, and about the things they missed most. For Ethan, it was the simple comforts, his favorite coffee, the smell of rain on a warm street, the sound of traffic in the distance. For Zara, it was the vast open skies of her world, the feeling of freedom as she soared through the air, and the connection she felt to the land she had grown up on. It was strange how much they had come to rely on each other in such a short time. What had started as a mutual need for survival had grown into something deeper. Ethan didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, the uncertainty had shifted into a quiet trust. They were no longer just two people stranded on a strange planet. They were partners. They were each other's strength. "Zara," Ethan said one evening, his voice serious. "What if they don't come? What if we have to do this ourselves?" Zara turned to face him then, her golden eyes steady, unwavering. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice soft but confident. "I've faced worse than this. We'll find a way." Ethan could feel the weight of her words. There was a fire in her that he hadn't expected, something fierce, something unyielding. And in that moment, he realized that he wasn't just relying on Zara for survival. He was relying on her for something more: hope, belief, and strength. As they sat together that night, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was companionable. They didn't need words to fill the space. They understood each other, perhaps more than they ever had before. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Ethan noticed a faint flicker of light in the distance. At first, he thought it was just the early light playing tricks on his eyes, but then it grew brighter, stronger. He stood up, his heart racing in his chest. "Zara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look." Zara stood, following his gaze. Her eyes widened as she saw what he had spotted, a distant ship, slowly approaching. Through the atmosphere, the rescue team had arrived. Relief washed over Ethan like a tidal wave, so overwhelming that he could hardly breathe. He turned to Zara, his eyes filled with emotion. "They're here," he said, a grin spreading across his face. Zara's golden eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. It was a smile full of gratitude, of hope, and of something deeper. "We did it," she whispered. Together. As the ship drew closer, they made their way to the landing site, their steps quickening with excitement. The rescue team was finally here, but in that moment, Ethan realized that the journey they had shared, the bond they had built, was something that would stay with him long after they left the planet. It was more than just survival. It was a connection that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. And as the ship touched down, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that they would face together, no matter what the future held. It had been several hours since the rescue team had landed, and Ethan and Zara stood side by side, watching as the alien ship deployed its crew. The sight of it was surreal, like a dream coming true. The spacecraft, sleek and silver, gleamed under the planet's twin suns as it settled onto the uneven surface. Ethan could hardly believe it, the reality of their situation slowly sinking in. They had survived. They had made it. The last few weeks had felt like an eternity. It had been a time of struggle, fear, and uncertainty, but through it all, they had found something in each other, a strength neither of them had expected. The rescue team moved swiftly, their alien technology allowing them to assess the environment and begin preparing the ship for takeoff. Ethan had never seen such advanced technology up close, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply watch, awestruck. Zara, however, seemed more focused. She was watching the team's movements with quiet interest, her golden eyes scanning the surroundings. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride that they had made it this far, together. "We did it," he said softly, turning to Zara. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, we did." There was a softness in her voice, but also something deeper, a knowing. "You didn't give up," she added, her gaze meeting his. "You never lost hope." Ethan smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Neither did you," he said quietly. "I wasn't alone in this." Zara looked at him then, her expression softer than usual, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. They both knew how much the journey had taken out of them. They had both been through so much, but it was the bond they had formed, the trust they had built, that had kept them going. Without it, neither of them would have made it. As the rescue team began their preparations, one of the crew members approached them. He was tall, with skin the color of polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faintly with an inner light. He spoke in a language that was foreign to Ethan, but Zara responded in kind, her voice calm and measured. The exchange lasted only a moment, but Ethan could tell that Zara was giving them the all-clear, making sure that everything was ready for their departure. Ethan glanced around one last time at the planet they had called home for so long. It had been a harsh and unforgiving place, but it had also given him something invaluable, a deeper understanding of himself, of what it meant to rely on others, and what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself. As the alien crew member turned to leave, Zara turned to Ethan, her golden eyes locking with his once more. "Are you ready to go home?" she asked softly. Ethan's heart gave a strange, bittersweet lurch at the thought of leaving the planet behind. He wasn't sure if it was the right thing, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't leaving alone. "I am," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not leaving you behind, Zara." She smiled then, a genuine, warm smile that made Ethan's heart swell. "Good," she said softly, "because I wouldn't leave you either." Together, they walked toward the ship, toward whatever awaited them beyond the stars. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. As they stepped onto the ship, the door closed behind them, and the engines hummed to life. The planet below grew smaller as the ship ascended, the stars ahead becoming brighter and clearer. Ethan looked at Zara once more, her presence beside him a steady, comforting force, and he knew that no matter where they were headed, it didn't matter. They were together, and together, they could face anything. It had been several weeks since Ethan and Zara had left the planet behind, the vast expanse of space now their new reality. They had been on the alien ship for what felt like a lifetime, but in a strange way, the endless stretch of stars outside the window was a comfort. As the ship hummed steadily through the galaxy, Ethan sat beside Zara, watching as she absorbed the data from the ship's systems with a focused intensity. Her golden eyes scanned the holographic displays, her fingers gliding over the controls with practiced ease. Ethan couldn't help but admire her. Zara had always been a force to be reckoned with, but now, in the quiet of space, she was even more of an enigma. He had never met anyone like her before, strong, intelligent, and yet there was a depth to her that he was only beginning to understand. For days, they had traveled together, each of them wrapped in their own thoughts. But today, there was something different. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. There was a comfort in it now, a shared understanding. They had become a team, in the truest sense of the word. "You're quiet," Zara said, her voice breaking the stillness. She didn't look up from the controls, but Ethan could feel her attention on him. "Just thinking," he replied, his voice soft. "About what?" she asked, her golden eyes finally meeting his. Ethan shrugged, leaning back in his seat. "About everything. About how we got here. About what comes next." Zara's gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "What comes next?" she repeated, her voice quieter this time. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I think we'll figure it out." Zara didn't say anything for a moment, her eyes turning back to the screen. But Ethan could tell she was processing his words, her mind working behind the calm exterior. "I think you're right," she said finally, her voice steady. "We've made it this far, haven't we?" Ethan smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yeah," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "We've made it this far." As the days passed, the ship continued its journey toward the distant star system that would be their new home. But for the first time since their rescue, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The unknown no longer felt like a threat. It felt like an opportunity. For both of them. The bond they had forged over the past few months was stronger than anything either of them had expected. It had been born from necessity, from survival, but now, it was something more. Zara had become more than just a companion. She had become his partner, in every sense of the word. And though they didn't know what the future held, neither of them felt afraid. The ship's engines hummed steadily, the stars outside a blur as they traveled deeper into space. Ethan glanced at Zara, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's lights. She was focused, determined, and yet, there was something different in her expression now. She had let down the walls she had built around herself, the ones she had so carefully maintained. And in return, Ethan had done the same. They were no longer just two people trying to survive. They were a team, a unit. And together, they would face whatever came next. "We're almost there," Zara said, breaking the silence once more. Ethan nodded, his heart quickening at the thought. "Yeah," he replied. "We're almost there." But it wasn't just the physical distance that was shrinking. It was the distance between them, the emotional gap that had once felt so vast. Now, it was barely noticeable. They had crossed it together, side by side, and the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt full of possibility. As the ship continued its journey, Ethan and Zara sat together, their shared silence speaking volumes. They didn't need to say anything more. They knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered.